standing up. There we go. I have video.
Yeah, and I will post this after I get it all cut up on the YouTube channel, so you guys, you can tell anybody that wanted to be here, couldn't be here, where to go to it. I'll have it on the website too.
Hi everyone, my name is Justin Noel. I'm a recent JavaScript developer. My experience is in LAMP, enterprise development for telecom industry. I did very little front-end work. Most of it was back-end work, with a little bit of front-end work. Back in April of last year, my wife got really sick. And I had an idea for an app, and we just decided that I was going to have to manage our young children for most of her sickness, and we just decided to go for it. Quit my job, started managing the family, and started dabbling with an app idea I had. I had never done consumer-oriented application development ever. So I'm used to engineers that can deal with a complicated GUI and can work their way through it. And so this was quite daunting to me. It's really a big difference between somebody who expects something complicated and somebody that just wants to literally scroll through and make something happen. So I faced a lot of challenges with that. And I didn't know how to develop apps. So I started dabbling, and I looked at jQuery Mobile. And at the time, iOS 7 was just about to come out, and jQuery Mobile was looking really dated. I tried dabbling with Bootstrap and trying to get Bootstrap to look good on a cell phone, and it's pretty hard to do, or at least it was for me. I played around with some commercial UI frameworks, and again, I couldn't make them look the way I wanted to look. So I finally gave up, and I just hired a designer to create, unfortunately was a UI element framework. Sliders and all of that good stuff. But I'm not a front-end guy, so it was really hard for me to take my code and make the front end do interactive things. I'm terrible at CSS. I can't design to save my life. Stick figures with hair is about as artistic as I get. And so I really wasn't making much progress. And I literally burned all the way from April to October trying to get something that looked even semi-decent. And then I heard about the Ionic Framework that was coming out. I was already doing my app in Angular after trying a few others. And literally in just a few minutes, you could come up with a pretty good iOS UI. And it integrated with Angular so well because most of the UI elements, in fact all of the UI elements in the Ionic framework are Angular directives. So it was kind of a match made in heaven. So I started rolling on that, and literally from virtually nowhere, November 1st, to the end of April, being done with my app, submitted, and it's on the App Store now. So Ionic is a really good way for you to get rolling on hybrid apps. Okay, is Ionic going to be the framework you want to use for desktop enterprise apps? Probably not. It really is oriented at mobile. In most browsers, Chrome in particular, it works great. In fact, a lot of what I'll demo tonight is in Chrome, and so if you wanted to use it, you could. But it's not guaranteed to have browser support for desktop. It's a hybrid mobile app development. So let me show you the standard Ionic presentation, and then we'll go through some samples. So Ionic was released back in about October of 2013 by a company called Drifty. You may have heard some of their products before. They have the Codica jQuery mobile drag and drop GUI development framework. But Ionic was something completely different for them. They started it open source, and it's staying open source. They just announced 2 months or so ago that they've received a seed round, and they're going to build out Ionic into not only a mobile development framework, but a back-end framework for supporting Ionic. So they're really dedicated to it, and it's going to have a lot of traction. It's already getting a lot of traction in the mobile development community. So you want to build a native app. Okay, you get more platforms and more problems. As we know, developing across all the platforms can be pretty difficult. You've got the problem where you're going to learn Objective Objective-C, and your whole team's going to learn Objective-C. And then you need to release it on Android, so now your whole team needs to learn Java. And being particularly good at Objective-C and particularly good at Java is going to be pretty tough for the average developer. Quite often what you get in companies is you get the iOS developers and the Java developers, and it doesn't mix particularly well. So a lot of people go for hybrid or HTML5 apps wrapped in PhoneGap, and that's exactly what Ionic is. HTML5 apps can look like native apps if designed properly and with the interaction designed properly. Most consumers can't tell the difference. Almost all of the HTML5 development is done with Cordova, or more commonly referred to as PhoneGap, where it's a bridge between the native interface and HTML5 and JavaScript. When people first started talking about hybrid development, the browsers on mobile weren't particularly good. You had lots of slow reaction. It was really hard to get the same smooth interactions that you could in a native app. But things have changed drastically. Modern mobile browsers are very good. So to get there, your native HTML or your HTML5 app to native, you need an open source framework that has a strong community. You need something to bridge the gap between JavaScript development and native development. You need a framework that has the interactions that consumers have grown used to with iOS and Android. And then a little dig there on jQuery. jQuery is amazing, and it's helped so many companies develop amazing products. But it's not really very well suited for mobile anymore. And that's where Ionic comes in. It's HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And that JavaScript is completely Angular based. The UI components are all Angular directives. It uses Sass for CSS development. If you don't know Sass, and I don't know if anybody even here knows what Sass is, but basically Sass is a development language for CSS. Okay, you use variables in Sass. You can import files in it, and then when you run Sass, it produces CSS files that okay. So if you've got a base color, okay, if you're designing the whole app in CSS, you're going to write that base color 100 times, right? Well, with Sass, it's a variable, and you put in there what that base color is, and then when you process the Sass into CSS, it automatically puts that base variable into everywhere in the app that needs it. You decide you want a new color scheme, you change one variable, and boom, Sass makes a brand new scheme for it. But I don't do Sass. With Ionic, you don't need to know Sass. You can use the base Ionic CSS that's generated by Sass, and then you can just override anything you want to. And it's actually fairly simple to do, and it works pretty well. Ionic is really focused on performance. Right now, Ionic is predominantly an iOS framework, and with support for Android. Because of the fragmentation of Android, in particular, when you talk about Android fragmentation, it gets even worse when it comes to the browsers on Android. Android itself is fairly stable. The UI components in them are all fairly stable, but the browsers have changed so drastically over the last few years that getting a broad range of Android browser support is pretty tough to do. So Ionic is really focused on Android 4.0 and up. It actually works in 2.3 and up, but some things just aren't going to work, or some things are going to be particularly slow. But overall, in a more modern device, Ionic performs really well. Okay. Now, something that the Ionic team just announced is that we're going to start doing a lot more work with Cordova plugins. There are a lot of Cordova plugins out there right now. There are some limitations of them. There are some difficulties in using them, so the Ionic team is actually going to start producing their own Cordova plugins that will integrate better with the Ionic framework. Ionic's really nice looking. Like I said, when you pull up a stock Ionic app, demo app, it looks like an iOS app on the phone. Really nice CSS, really smooth interaction, the animation they do on iOS, it's really nice. I apologize there, Jim, you've been saying iconic, it's actually Ionic. But funnily enough, there's also another open source project called Ionicons. And it's like 400 or 500 icons for general interaction. And there's, for almost every single one of them, there's an Android version and an iOS version. So you don't have to roll out your iOS app, repackage it as an Android app and have it look like an iOS app on Android. You use the right icons and you look like you've got a stock Android interface. Okay, just a little example here, lists. Lists are a very common UE element in any application development. As you can see here, you've got list dividers, you've got list items, and you've got the indicators showing if you click it, you go somewhere else. This is literally all the code required to produce a list like that. Okay? You have in your controller, you've got some data, and you put that, you generally you'd use an ng repeat on a list item, and boom, you've got a standard mobile interface for lists. Okay? Something that's really uncommon in any HTML5-based UE frameworks is what we are all familiar with on iOS, complex lists. If you go into a settings app on iOS and you see a list and you can drag it and it shows these option buttons here, you can edit it or delete it. Not many UE frameworks have anything like that, and it works really nicely on Ionic. I mean, it's an almost exact clone of iOS. And then again, it's really easy to do. You have again, all of Ionic's elements are Angular directives. They're all prefixed as ion. So you just say ion list, ion item, ng repeat, and you tell it how many items you've got in your, you just put in your controller all your data and it repeats through them. And then you tell it what your option buttons are, and it will create all of that for you. You don't have to design those at all. You don't have to do anything with them. When the user drags that across, there's your edit, delete, or whatever other option button you want. Tabs, again, tabs are a very common mobile UE interface. And again, with Ionic, it's literally this simple. You tell it you want tabs, you tell it what each tab is going to be, and it automatically negotiates via responsive design the tab elements on the bottom. You can name those. You can have the title on top. You can have the title to the left. Bottom, right. You can do anything you want with them. You can put that tab strip on the top if that's the design you want to have. And when you click between them, each one of these tabs has its own navigation stack. So say you're on this tab right here, and these were clickable list items, and so you click one and you navigate somewhere else. Okay. You can navigate right back into that tab and get a full animation view. The slides come in from one side or the other, and every tab has its own independent navigation stack. Side menus, again, Facebook is probably the most common UE element for side menus, where you drag your screen and it opens up a side menu. Or you use the hamburger stack, as it's called, and you instantly see options you can choose from here. You click these, and boom, you're in a new view with new information. Really easy to do in Ionic. Your code here is you tell it you want side menus. This part right here is side menu content. I'm not a really big fan of the name of that directive, ion side menu content. That tells me this, but that's not what it is. This is the actual main view pane. And then the actual side menu, side left, is the individual list of items in your side menu. I think it's a little confusing, but oh well. It works really well. The slide box. Quite often you get a brand new app, and you come up and there's the little pager icons on the bottom there, and you just flip through as you kind of get the introduction to the app. You know, do this, do this, do this, and then when you're done, boom, you're using the app, and that little intro just goes away. That slide box, again, it's really simple to do. That's the code to show a slide box. Now, of course, the content in it, you're going to have to put in whatever HTML you want in there. But as far as creating the effect of a slide box, that's it. Okay, action sheets. You see this on iOS. I don't do Android. Actually, I'm kind of embarrassed. I've never held an Android phone in my hand, ever. I mean, that's really embarrassing, but I just never have. So on iOS, at least, is really common user interface. You need to do something, you click on something, a list comes up and gives you some options. Delete it, send it to your friends, whatever. So really common interaction. This right here is not a template. This right here is the actual Angular JavaScript to cause this here. You put in here the title of the action sheet, what the button should be, destructive text button, what should it say, and then depending on what button you press, what effect do you have in the controller on your model. Pull to refresh. Again, the rubber band thing. Let's see, there we go. That's built in. It's really nice having that in there. So many users are used to it. In my app in particular, my boys, they literally stand there for minutes pulling it down. Just they love the bounciness of it. And so many users love it. Creating that yourself in HTML5 is a nightmare. You got to know CSS really well. You got to know animation really well. Again, being just a terrible at CSS, I could have never have taken my app that I had custom designed and created these animations and interface elements on my own. It just wouldn't have happened. Navigation, again, I talked about tabs, where every tab has its own navigation stack. But if you're not using tabs, you have that same navigation stack as well. The Ionic uses the Angular UI router interface, or system instead of ng route. So you use UI router for that. And as you change states, your navigation stack starts recording all the states you previously had. So you can just click there and go back and back and back, and it'll automatically walk through. There's virtually no work involved in that. This Ion nav bar is kind of what controls that. You get an automatic back button if you want it. So it's really simple way to manage navigation state. Okay, it's MIT licensed. I mean, literally from the get-go, the first bit of code was MIT licensed. There's no commercial restrictions for using it. You don't need attribution. You want to make an app, get Ionic, and just start rolling with it. It's real nice. Okay, it's community powered. Again, this Drifty that's making Ionic, they have no financial interest in it. They get nothing for it. They don't offer paid support for it. I mean, literally within a week of setting up the Ionic community, they had 200 or 300 users. I mean, it was like that, and I was one of those. And as the months progressed, me and a couple of other people were the predominant contributors on the forum. And in the end, Ionic hired me part-time, Drifty hired me part-time to help manage the forum and just make sure somebody was always there to answer a question. And again, this is a company that hasn't made a dime from this, and now they have 2 people on the forum team. That's all we do. And they're paying for having any forum where somebody's paid to make sure you get an answer one way or the other is astounding, especially since you're not paying for anything. All right, so the forum is forum.ionicframework.com. You can get Ionic on GitHub, Drifty Co. Ionic, and that's the standard Ionic presentation. Let me show you a couple of things on the forum. This is the Ionic forum. Let me get that zoomed in there. You can see, I mean, it's just people are on here all day long asking questions. It's a pretty good forum. There are some things I don't like about it, so you get an answer one way or the other is astounding, especially since you're not paying for anything. All right, so the forum is forum.ionicframework.com. You can get Ionic on GitHub, Drifty Co. Ionic, and that's the standard Ionic presentation. Let me show you a couple of things on the forum. This is the Ionic forum. Let me get that zoomed in there. You can see, I mean, it's just people are on here all day long asking questions. It's a pretty good forum. There are some things I don't like about it since I've got to be on it all day long. But it's very active. You see all these posts. So many people are on there involved. It's not a black hole where you go and post a question and 3 weeks later somebody says, well, did you try this? I mean, you will get some interaction within an hour or two in most cases. So it's a really good community. In all of my time on the forum, there's been one RTFM. We don't tolerate it. We don't need that kind of stuff. If somebody has no experience, they're going to get help. If somebody comes on and just carpet bombs the forum, we're going to help them. And what we find with that is that we don't get all the sniping back and forth, and it's probably the most polite community I've ever been involved with. It's really nice. Let's just go through the docs a little bit. I'll show you a few more things. If you start off on the Ionic website, just this standard website, wow, you can build great stuff, okay? You go to getting started, and we'll walk through that in just a second. Here's how you literally start with nothing and build yourself an Ionic app, okay? And then in the docs, you get an overview of what Ionic's all about. You go into CSS, talks about all of the Ionic look and feel. They're all Ionic directives under the hood, okay? You can just type div class equals bar, and you're going to get what looks like a standard iOS or Android header. Okay, but by doing this, these are all actually Ionic directives. And so Ionic, as soon as it sees them, latches onto them and starts managing. Okay? If you wanted to, you could take the CSS of Ionic and not use anything else, just the CSS, and have a UE framework that you could take over and do with whatever you wanted to. But then you're going to lose all the animation, you're going to lose the controller interfaces and all of that. But it's possible, and some people are in fact doing that. Okay, so let's look at tabs. Okay, here's how you do tabs. Here's a demo of tabs, and you can sit there and click through the tabs and scroll them. Ionic did not use the standard built-in iOS and Android scroller. They created their own scroller. It's based off another open source project, but it gives a very smooth interaction. It's really nice. Side menus, a little side menu demo here. You can see it, you drag it. You can drag the screen, or you can press the hamburger icon. Okay. Navigation in Ionic, you click here, you get the animation of one state changing to another, just like that. You've got your back button. You can decide if you want a back button on any view or not. Lists. Again, And standard lists, looks like our demo died. Yes, it did. Our demo died on that. Forms, I don't know if there's a demo on that, but I'll show you something in a minute. Here's that slide box I was talking about, where you can just drag, see different views. You can put navigation in there if you want to. You can show the little pager buttons at the bottom if you want to. And it wasn't in the earlier presentation, but a modal where you click a button and it takes over the whole screen. You do something within that little view. You can't do anything else below it, and then it goes away. That's all built in. Let's see if there's a demo on that. It's been a while since I've actually looked at the release docs. Here's the action sheet. See how that interacts there. We now have pop-ups. Pop-ups are fairly new. You click something. These are really ugly. They're not meant to look particularly good, and they're not working, so I'll skip those right now. We're not really happy with our use CodePen for samples, and it's not quite working for us. The loading indicator, you do something that requires an asynchronous call, you get the little loading indicator, you can change that to whatever text or icons, whatever you want. So that's kind of the standard stuff. If you look at card interfaces, those are really common. Nice presentation of information. I use this particular interaction quite a bit. What I do with cards is when you're onboarding somebody, say you've got a long form, that's about the worst thing to do on a mobile phone is to scroll through, fill out a form, scroll through, fill out. It's kind of a nightmare. So what I use cards for is I break up my form into little chunks, and I walk the user. They literally just see one of the little chunks at a time, and when they filled out the whole thing, I show them something like this, where they can see the information they entered. So if they clicked there, they would enter their address. Well, when they're done with the whole form, it shows all of their details, and so they can review it right there on that screen, and then press submit. It works really nice. More form information here. You can have different types of form design for labels. About everything you can imagine there. Here's all the toggles. I don't think these, they do work. Okay. So you see that's just like a standard iOS toggle. And checkboxes as well. They all work really well. There's ranges. The ranges aren't as complicated as some people would like them. A lot of people want a double slider on their ranger, so you can choose, a starting and an ending. We don't have that. And these are just standard HTML5 rangers decorated to look like an iOS interface. Select. This is actually something brand new to me. I've never seen that. I generally just lean on the native select element that iOS and Android provide. I learned something new today. This probably wasn't here a few weeks ago. Again, tabs, you've seen that. And then if you're doing something where, with Bootstrap, everybody loves Bootstrap. It's a responsive grid system, and you can tell columns and all of that. Ionic has basically the same thing. You tell it you want 4 columns, and it will perfectly evenly space 4 columns throughout your interface. You can tell it all the different combinations of sizes you'd like, percentages, and then on really common thing is a responsive grid, where if this were an iPad, all those buttons would be spread across the screen. But on a smaller phone, it automatically creates a stacked row of elements. So that's kind of a walkthrough. These are the standard Ionic colors. They're all named something, but then again, with Sass, what you can do is you can go in and you can find the variable for light and make it whatever you want. You compile your CSS, and now your light is something completely different from everybody else's. Or you can do what I just do, is I just override the color for light in my own little style sheet, and it works perfectly too. So that's a rough introduction to the Ionic docs. So let's actually do something. We're going to go to the Getting Started page, and there are some criteria for Ionic. You've got to have Node installed, and you need to have Cordova installed, Cordova PhoneGap. Other than that, you're pretty much done there. So I'm not going to actually run the npm install. Ionic has a command line utility. Okay? So once the Ionic command line utility is installed, you actually can run Ionic commands to create an app, emulate it, build it for Cordova. So you don't have to know all the Cordova commands. You could have never looked at Xcode in your life and get an Ionic app running on an iOS simulator. Okay? To install Ionic, you just do a standard node npm install. -G is global, meaning install it throughout your entire system. Install Cordova, and install Ionic. Okay? So once you've done that, you now have the Ionic command line utility on your machine. And so I'm going to start one. And we've got 3 different starters that you can just kind of grow from. There's just a blank app, and literally all it is a view with a header, nothing else. Okay? And then there's a tab example, and that's just as you see there, a starter tab with a list inside each one of the tabs. And then there's the side menu sample. That's the one I'm going to do here. Okay, so in just whatever directory you want your app to be in, you do Ionic start. My app is just whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to say, what am I doing right now? Demo. So it's going to start an app in a demo folder, and it's going to be based on the side menu template. When you do that, and it's going to download the base Ionic app, and then it's going to modify it. And there it goes. See what my internet looks like here. Yeah, that should be pretty good. Okay, and it's done. If I look in this directory, I now have my demo. Okay, so I changed directory to demo. All right, and then I go to the docs. Let me close something real quick here. Okay, so I go to the docs, and the next step was change directory to whatever you call it, which I've just done. And now Ionic platform add iOS. That is a modification of Cordova PhoneGap to tell the app, or to tell the project to include iOS as an available platform. So I'm going to do that. And it's going to install the plugins for Cordova, the console, so that you can troubleshoot, the device so that it can detect what type of device it is, and that will be used by the CSS to know how to lay things out. And the status bar on iOS and Android is the very top bar that lists the time and your internet connection quality, that type of thing. And the status bar plugin, again, helps to lay out the view. Okay? And I'm going to, again, Ionic build iOS is a modification of Cordova's build command. I'm going to run that here. You may have seen that. Let me pull it up here. There we go. All right. So I said Ionic build iOS. It's going to run the build task, and it's building platform iOS. The reason it's done that is because, one, I told it to iOS, and two, it has no option because I didn't install the Android platform or Windows Phone or Firefox OS. And now the last thing to do to get an Ionic app running on your simulator is Ionic emulate iOS. One second. Yes?
I take it that this is actually using Xcode to kick stuff off in the background?
No.
Okay.
But you do have to have Xcode installed.
Okay.
Okay? So, all right, first you're going to see a little bug. All right? That right there shouldn't be like that. It should actually say playlist. I'm using a nightly release of Ionic right now, and so we got that little bug. All right. you click here, just like you would on any, now it's fixed, and when we go back, and it looks good, okay? That'll be fixed pretty soon. So as you can see here, I got a nice rubber band effect. I don't have the pull to refresh because there's no data store to pull from. But standard looking iOS interaction, I can click on any one of these and you can see I get a nice transition. My view does that just like most apps do right now. And the nice thing here is I can either pull right here, and there's my menu, or I can click on the little toggle and there's my menu. And I can go click on there. There's a little bugginess there, and browse. So you click on the items there, the menu automatically closes and it shows the view. And so literally in a minute, you have something to work with. So let's see what that code looks like.
Good question for you.
Sure.
If you wanted to write something that work with iOS and Android, how would that command sequence vary?
If you wanted to do both?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the same time.
All right. All you got to do there is, let me pull that up for you here. When I did Ionic Platform add iOS, you would have also done Ionic Platform add Android. Okay. And then you got to take different paths here. You can't emulate both at the same time from the command line. So you're going to do your work in iOS first, and then you come over and instead of Ionic build iOS, you do Ionic build Android, and then Ionic emulate Android. And again, same thing with iOS. With iOS, you have to have Xcode installed, so you have an emulator, etc. And with Android, you have to have the Android SDK installed. So those are prerequisites for that. And Ionic doesn't install Android or iOS development kits for you. You got to do that yourself. So let's look at what code it generated. Let me pull that up here. Okay, most of what you see here is Cordova specific stuff. Package.json is just a standard node package. You don't have to ever touch that. In fact, you never even have to use it. Okay, Ionic uses that to get your app scaffolded and up and running. If you want to, then you can start doing your other things in there. If you wanted to use Grunt instead of Gulp, if you wanted to use Karma to kick off tests, you can do all of that as well. You can add depth dependencies in here, just like you normally do any normal node development. But if you don't know Node nor do Node development, then you can just ignore that file. Really, the only thing you need to worry about is right here, the www file. Okay? So here is index.html, which is by default Cordova when it launches an app in the device. The default is going to be index.html. If you wanted something else, you could tell it to. But with single page apps, there's really no need to do anything else. And here's the entire index.html. Meta information, the links to the Ionic files, and again, the Ionic installer automatically pulled those down into your local directory for you. They're right here. If you're running SAS, then you need to uncomment this so that it will automatically build your SAS files for you. Gulp will manage that. Again, if you don't do that, you can just ignore that. It automatically installs a single, this is really nice in some cases, not so great in others, a single JavaScript file to automatically incorporate all of Angular and all of Ionic. Okay, that one file. That's really nice because otherwise, if you're doing Angular on your own, you've got to install Ionic, or you've got to include Ionic, and then you've got to include Angular, and then you've got to include NUI route, and you've got to do UI router and NG resource, and you've got a long list of files that you've got to include to use Angular. Well, by default, Ionic bundles all of that into one file, and you can change it to a minified file when you're going into production, and it's all there. Okay, there's a few problems with it. Some not as well written Ionic or Angular modules that you may find on GitHub or anywhere else. They have some dependency injection problems that don't work with this. My own personal app, some of my own low quality code caused problems with bundles, so I had to do the individual Angular file But if you're not doing anything really strange or out of the box, you just use that bundle, which is really nice. All PhoneGap/Cordova apps have to have this script tag in here, Cordova.js. And what you'll find in your directory here, there is no such thing as Cordova.js. And what happens there is when you build using PhoneGap/Cordova, it automatically injects the Cordova file into your application or your OS specific directory. And I'll show you that here. When you build in Android or Cordova, it creates this platform. And again, we told it to add platform iOS. That's this right here. And then it creates a copy of your www directory. So everything in this directory gets automatically imported into the platform-specific www directory. And Cordova.js is inside there. Again, with Ionic, you may never look in that directory nor never need to know that it's there. You just worry about the www directory. Okay?
So if you just mentioned deploy the web app, you just kind of scrap that.
Sure. Yeah. And as the gentleman asked, if you use just a web app, not a hybrid or a native app, just a web app, Ionic looks great in all the mobile OS browsers. Okay, and then the next part of it is app.js, and if you're familiar with Angular, you know what app.js is, and controller.js. Now, by default, these are really simple app launchers and controllers. There's not a whole lot to them. And you may find that in a more complex app, having a single controller file just doesn't cut it for you. And then you go in and you modify the controllers and services and directives however you like to organize them. But by default, they're going to get included. And then here's the ng app, which initializes any Angular app, and it's just called start. That's just the name they chose for it. And then here's the key thing here, Ion View. Okay, Ion Nav View. Everything goes inside there. That's a part of UE router. Do you know what UE router is when I say Angular UE? Okay, there's Angular, which was written by the Google Angular team. And then some guys came along and they decided they wanted an Angular UE for Bootstrap. And so they created all of these directives that match Bootstrap, but they're Angular directives. So if you want a tab interface, like a desktop style tab with the folder icons on the top, Angular UE shows those. If you want, just pretty much any interaction you can imagine on a enterprise desktop app, Angular UE has that. Well, there was one problem with Angular that it was really hard to have nested views. What I mean by that is you have a container and you want to target this portion of the container and you want to target this portion of the container. Okay? Nested views. So in my controller, I may want to change something in here. And then in the same controller, I want to say, or in a different controller, I should say, change something in here, but the view has not changed. The state hasn't changed. Your URL has not changed. Well, with Angular, that wasn't possible. Okay? You didn't have the ability to target different portions of one state. Okay? So the Angular UE team created what was called Angular UE Router, and it replaces ng-route, if you're familiar with that. Okay? And you can target individual portions of the view, and each one of those can have states. So you can have a view, and again, the URLs never change, or it can if you want it to. And you can be changing stuff in the view on the fly. And that's what Angular UE Router created. And those are called nav views in UE Router. Everything in Angular is prefixed with Ion. So that's what this does here. This Ion view allows you to put as many individual states in one view as you want, or more traditional, just one view at a time. So that's what that's all about. Okay? So let's look at our app.js real quick. This is what's going to initialize the Angular app. And here it is. Okay? Angular module starter. This is the name of the Angular app. It's going to dependency inject Ionic and starter controllers. If you look at our HTML, there's our controllers that are going to be injected in here. Okay. The run function is just basically Cordova has a device ready ready event. When on a phone gap app, when the app runs and it's now got access to all the native APIs, a thing called Cordova or device ready fires. The device is ready, and now you can start accessing the camera or the file system. Well, this just sits there and waits for that Cordova event to happen, and then Ionic takes over and starts using the device information, width, heights, etc., platform, versions, to know how to design the UI. So that just, boom, it happens by default. Okay, and then you get into the config where you're defining the routes. Again, Ionic does not use ng route, it yanked it out, and it put UI router in there, and you have states instead of views, or routes I should say, and you define your routes like this. Okay, so our main view is going to be app. Okay, then we're going to have a sub-state called search, another one called browse, and then we're telling it where are the templates for this stuff. Okay, and playlists, and again, where are the templates, what's the controller for this particular view, and then at the end it tells it, unless directed otherwise, show this view, app/playlist. And that right here is this. Okay? So the playlist route, or the playlist state, is going to pull up a controller called playlist, and let's look at that real quick. Controllers. Here's all the controllers we have defined right now. There's just an overarching app controller that does nothing right now. You could yank that out or do something else, depending on what you want to do. And the playlist controller literally does nothing except put some data on the scope. And that is the list of genres right there. Okay? And then that's all it does, nothing else. Okay, so if you look at your templates, here's the actual HTML that was not in index.html. Here's all of the Ionic directives to create the look and feel of the app. So if we look at playlists, here's playlists. It's saying an Ion view. Okay, with UI router you have nav views, okay, which are places where content can be put into, and you can have multiple nav views. Okay, and then you have views which says put this HTML in that spot, and so that's what that's doing here. It's giving it the title playlist, which we see there. It's giving the nav buttons. You can make those anything you want, but it's going to be a class of button icon, and the name of it is called Ion Navicon, which is the famous hamburger button. Okay, and then here's the content. Okay, that was all just defining the header portion of it. The content, the scrollable content, is defined right here. You tell it, this is actually a bit old. In the newest release, you won't need to do this anymore. You tell it there's a header. Because if you didn't tell it there was a header, the view would be up at the top here, and you'd be hiding some of your view. Okay, so you tell it has header, which gives it spacing to be below the header. And then you just do an Ion list. This is a simple Ion list, not a complex one that you can drag and stuff. And you tell it for every one of my members of my playlist, which is this list right here, create me an Ion item and put the title inside. And that's what that does. You get that view right there by default. Okay? Now, the href on that, it's a link. It says go to app playlist, and then the ID of whatever playlist this was, and each playlist had an ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Okay? And so theoretically, if you were in your app and you click on one of these, you are sending it a playlist item. Okay, so now Ionic's done with its scaffold and its demo, right? So if you wanted to do something here, then you would look at the state parameters that got passed into this view, and it's going to say it was play or ID number 5. And then you could call an AJAX call to a server saying, hey, give me all the albums in the reggae genre. And and boom, you could put that data on your scope and do whatever you want with it. So that's a standard, simple Ionic app that you literally can create that. And as you saw, I mean, it's running in minutes. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I don't actually like the Ion emulate iOS. So what I do is on my demo, I go into my platform, iOS, and here's my actual Xcode project. Okay? I'm going to pull that up here. Give me a second. I'm going to project my phone onto the screen here, and I'm going to come into Xcode, and I'm going to tell it to actually build that app we just walked through in the simulator. I'm going to tell it to build it on my phone. That's the default phone gap splash screen. When you're developing an app, you replace that with whatever graphic you've got. Okay, and again we've got the truncated title. Okay, but there's the app running on an actual device. I can click one of these, boom, get playlist, and go back, get the nice interaction. I can drag it over to show my menu. If I don't like dragging menus, I can put the little hamburger, go to my playlist, go browse, back to playlist, and it works. I mean, that's awesome. I don't think there's one common bug with Ionic, and we're really trying to work it out, is that sometimes the header on iOS, because of the new iOS 7, this can all change colors at the same time. It automatically incorporates your theme and changes the status bar color on the fly. That has caused a lot of headaches throughout the hybrid app development world, and Ionic's no exception to it. I think it's almost cured, but sometimes, for whatever reason, some people have that problem. There's a whole lot of little things you can do to try to fix it, but as far as I know, that is the most common problem I've ever seen. If you walk through those Ionic install, etc., and all of those 4 steps, you'll have an app on your phone in a few minutes. The app stores are littered with brochure apps where somebody with a roofing company wanted an app for whatever reason. If you don't have very big plans in life, you could literally make $1 million just selling roofing website apps to the end of your days in a few minutes every day, making 20 a day with Ionic. Okay, if you want to do something a little more grandiose, you got to do a lot more work. But just getting started is really easy to do. Okay, so I've set up another sample. I'm not going to live code it. It's not going to happen. So I'm just going to display it here. I'm just going to kill the simulator. I'm going to stop this project here. And it's not very complex, but it's literally the steps we went there to have that side menu app that I just showed. It's exactly that, and then modify. So let me pull that up here. Okay. If you go to the DFW airport website and you search for your flight, you're using this company. You don't know it. DFW doesn't have its own flight data. Okay, it uses this company called Flight Stats. And so if you want to recreate the DFW airport website, you come on here, you get a developer account, ta-da, you know every flight coming and going out of DFW, or any other airport for that matter. So you apply, you get an app key, and this is a commercial service. After 30 days, you got to pay for it. So I just quickly threw together this today, actually. Probably quite a few bugs. I didn't do any testing and we just threw it out there. But here's that app modified. Again, standard www directory. If you look at my index file, I didn't change anything really except one. I changed the bundled Ionic to use the nightly from the CDN. Okay, so this is literally, I mean, when we say nightly, we mean like they just committed code 30 minutes ago. So my demo may break in just a minute, but we'll see. It also included Lodash. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Lodash or underscore. It's a really nice library for dealing with arrays and collections. Much better than the average developer can do themselves, certainly me. Okay, I've also added in a services.js file. Again, in a complex app, this is not the way I would have done. I would have had a directory for each view, a controller inside each directory, but for this it worked great. And let me show you what my app.js looks like. So just like before, I didn't even change the name of the ng app. I injected starter controllers, and I also injected my new starter services. I'm running the Ionic platform just like before. I did some config in here to deal with cores. If you're not familiar with cores, you will be soon once you start iOS development. And then I changed the states. So there was playlist before, and browse before, and search before. Well, I changed it to airlines, flights, and flight details. So really, I haven't done much different here. And then I pull up controllers. And these are really ugly, just slapped together code for this demo. App control, again, I just left it in there. Flights control, what it's going to do is it's going to inject my new flight data service that I created. And it's going to fetch flights. And it's going to put those flights on the scope. Flight detail control, it's going to use my flight data service and state parameters in your URL where you say app/flight/flight22. Well, that's what the state params is going to give you that flight number. And then I'm just telling it on the scope, put my data object with a property called flight details and go get the details for this flight ID. Airlines control, basically the same thing, flight data service. This one's a little more complex, I'll explain that in a minute. But it's essentially going to do the same thing. It's going to say, hey, go get me a bunch of airlines, every airline in the world, in fact. Okay? And then my airline control is just a simple view that will show some details about that airline. And then in my templates here, here's what my airline file looks like. It's a view, title airline, welcome to the name of the airline, and then I'm showing JSON of everything about that airline because I didn't feel like adding anything neat looking. My list of airlines is, again, some nav buttons for the navigation menu, a header bar, and this header bar is not the main nav bar, it's a subheader, and it's a search field. And I'll show you that use in a minute. And then here's my content. Make me a list of every airline and all the airlines in the world. Okay? And then, there's something really neat here. It doesn't work perfectly. Works pretty well, though. Ion infinite scroll. Okay? On a mobile device, you don't want to show every airline in the world all at one time. It's going to slow down. Even in a lot of web apps, you get over X thousand number of rows and your web app's crawling on a desktop. Okay? So this Ion infinite scroll is going to kind of take care of that for me. Okay? So let's look at that. Okay, so let me run this app in Xcode onto my phone. Sorry, guys. Okay. it just pulled up every airline in the world, okay? And if I scroll through here, first off, let me tell you this subheader here, there's a bug in that, okay? As you can see, look at the scroller. See how the scroller is up in that subheader? It shouldn't be, okay? So, if I pull this down, you can see that there's an airline hiding under that header bar. Okay, that's not normally there. It's the nightly bug, okay? So, as you can see here, I can rubber band this thing. It doesn't scroll to refresh, okay? So I can't pull new data down that way. But look how big the scroll bar is. See how big it is? All right? I don't want all 1,738 airlines in my app at once, so I'm going to scroll through. And now watch the scroll bar. It got a lot smaller. That was the infinite scroll. Ionic detected that I had scrolled to within, I think I made it 10% of the bottom of my list, and it automatically went out and grabbed some more. Okay? Now, because of the way the API works, the very first time I asked for all the airlines in the world, I got all the airlines in the world. And I put it in my service, and now instead of asking the API every time, give me all the airlines in the world, all it's doing is saying, give me the next 50. Okay? So I can scroll through there, and boom, I got 50 more. So I didn't have to bog down my phone with all of those. Okay? Now, I've got a bug because, again, it was just kind of hashed together code. So I'm going to quickly go somewhere else and then come back to it to clear my bug. Okay? Now, in my search field, in most Angular app examples you see, what happens is you start typing in the search field, and whatever data is in your scope, it starts filtering through that, right? Okay, and I'm going to do that in another view in a minute. But in this one, I don't have every airline in my scope. So if I start filtering, it's going to filter down to nothing, because if I want New Zealand Airlines, it's not in my list yet. So I didn't do that with this one. What this is going to do, it's actually going to, again, not the API, the cached list of airlines. It's going to go say, give me the first 50 that include these letters. So I'll start typing N, E, W, and boom, I've got, well, there's no New Zealand Airlines. Okay? So that's what that little search field's doing. Okay? And okay, I didn't want new airlines, so I click cancel, and boom, I'm back to my raw list. So as you